first thing you will need is a boot of your choice. So I decided to go with this over-the-knee boot here, but you can do a shorter boot or any type of boot. It doesn't really matter. I just picked one that had the same type of runching appearance as the ones that Rihanna wore that were the YSL brand. The next thing you'll need is your crystal paneling. Now I got 2 of these panels, which is how much you're going to need if you do over-the-knee boots like mine, and I will link down below where I purchased them from in case you want to check that out for yourself. And as far as tools go, these are the main ones you're going to use. It's going to be E6000 glue, a pair of tweezers for placing smaller crystals in spots that are hard to reach, and some scissors for cutting through the crystal paneling. Next, lay your crystal paneling horizontal along the boot so that the points of the material will be by the toe region. And make sure if any of the edges are irregular that you trim them so you get a nice flat edge. Now I already did the other boot first just to make sure that this project was even possible, and so I found that the best way to start was to work around the zipper. However, using boots with zippers is actually a really big pain, so I would recommend a boot that does not have a zipper at all, because trying to work around it and making sure the zipper still works can be kind of complicated. To make this easier, I would recommend pinning the crystal paneling into place along the seam of the boot or wherever you want the seam of the boot to be. This will just ensure that it doesn't slide out of place and you don't glue at a crooked angle. Also, if you're doing a over-the-knee type boot, you might want to stuff the boot with some sort of cloth. That way it just has a little bit more stability. Now you can see here that I put a couple pins in here because I lost my white fabric marker that would have helped me continue the seam down the toe, so that was the best that I could do. Make sure that you're not pulling the paneling super tight, because if your boot has ripples in it, you want it to fall into those ripple lines. Once you have it all pinned into place, you're going to notice that if you kept it straight all the way down the leg along the seam, that the ending may not line up perfectly, and that's because there's a dip in the boot, and if you try to make it straight, it causes a bunching rippling effect here. So what I did was I made it a little bit off center like this, and then I put in a triangle insert piece at the toe, and it ended up being pretty seamless, so I think it came out okay. So that's what I'm going to do again for this boot to make it match the first one. And once that is all pinned into place, you can go ahead and flip the boot onto its side. And now you can go ahead and start gluing down that toe region. And I usually just glue along the seam of where I'm going to be gluing the boot, just because the glue can come through the crystals and make them not as shiny. Now with the E6000 glue, it does take a little bit longer to dry, so if you mess up or you realize the placement isn't right, you can always take it off and reapply. And I usually glue in sections, so I apply glue to one section and then I wait for it to dry, and then I apply glue to the next section, so on. That way it doesn't slide out of place. Once you finish gluing your crystal paneling all the way up the seam of the boot, you're going to go ahead and start trimming the excess crystal paneling away so that it lines up along with the zipper seam. Cut small amounts at a time to make sure you don't cut too much of the crystal paneling off. Now as you can see, I've left some extra paneling here. I always like to cut off the excess first, just because I don't want to cut away too much at once and find that it doesn't line up all the way down the boot. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to find the end of my zipper, which is right about here, and I am going to go ahead and cut just a few centimeters into the crystal paneling and give a space for that zipper to sit. And that'll kind of give the guideline of where I'm going to want to cut all the way up the rest of the crystal paneling. Now I'm just going to take my E6000 glue and glue down the base of where that's going to go so that it stays in place. And don't worry if you have any extra spaces like I do here, you're gonna be able to fill that in later. Now I'm gonna trim off any excess I have here that is hanging underneath the sole of the boot. And remember, it's easiest if you do a little bit at a time, that way you aren't over clipping. But if you do, it's not a big deal. That's what we have the tweezers for, and you can glue on individual rhinestones in places where it needs it. Now you can begin cutting up the zipper line of your boot. If you have boots that don't have a zipper, then you can obviously skip this step entirely. Make sure you still leave a little excess though, because you want the fabric to have some give, that way you still have some flexibility in the boot and you're able to bend your knees. Now you can begin gluing the rest of the paneling down along the zipper. Be sure not to apply the glue too close to the zipper because you still want the zipper to be able to function, and the glue can interfere with that if it dries over the zipper line. Again, if you picked a bunchy boot like I did, don't worry about the paneling being lumpy. You want that ripple effect because it goes with the look of the boot. And just start applying the glue and pressing down so that it stays in place. And again, you don't want it to be too tight because you do want to be able to actually walk in them. Once the side by the zipper has dried, go ahead and flip it over and take your extra piece of crystal paneling that you trimmed off earlier, and again, lay that horizontally and find where you want it to line up with the edge of the crystal that you've already glued on. And if it makes it easier, go ahead and pin that down as well. And you will notice that there will be this triangular shape here because of the way that it lines up, but don't worry about that because we will fill that in later. For this side, I found that it was easier to start at the opposite end where I have a flat line to work with and work my way down the boot. Now that the seam is drying, go ahead and start adding individual rhinestones to places where it's a little bit bare and you might not be able to cut a narrow enough piece. This process is a little tedious, but it'll help make the overall effect much more seamless. And if you get the same type of crystal paneling as me, these little guys are going to pop off when you cut anyway, so you can just use the leftovers. Now we're gonna work on patching this part of the boot. And this part can be a little bit tricky, so I cut out a square piece here, larger than I need, just to line up along that seam of the boot there. And I'm only gonna glue part of it down first, which is the easy part that's up the straight line. I'm gonna go ahead and take that corner and apply it right down and press it down so it looks nice and seamless and you would never even know it's there. Go ahead and start gluing in your triangle piece here and then clipping away the excess, and don't worry if it doesn't line up perfectly because you will use your tweezers later to put individual stones in here to give a seamless effect. Go ahead and start filling in individual crystals in spots that are bare. Once you've finished the toe area, go ahead and flip the boot over and take the crystal paneling and just wrap that right up along the zipper. As you can see, there will be some overlap and that's fine. Also, don't glue it down too tightly because you want to still be able to bend your knee. And it's definitely going to be on the tight side as it is, but you want a little bit of flexibility. Go ahead and start trimming off a little bit of the excess, making sure to still leave room in case you make any mistakes. The good news is this is the easiest part and we are finally on the home stretch. The first thing I recommend doing is gluing the top here to the upper cuff of the boot. That way you will keep that nice straight line all the way across. And just make sure that when you are gluing the top that you leave a little bit of extra room and you don't pull it super tight because you want it to have some flexibility. Once that is dried, go ahead and flip back over and do the same thing, and then you can start gluing right down the line of the zipper. Remember, it's really important not to get too close to the zipper because then you will not be able to unzip the boots later. Once you've finished the other side, go ahead and flip your boot back over and start on wrapping the heel.